hospital where he was doing these studies. And he found out that he ended up having more cats than he needed. And so he began, or than he could feed. He began feeding them, instead of the scraps, what he was originally feeding them was scraps from the hospital. He began just getting scraps from like the meat processing plant. And he discovered that the cats he was feeding the raw meat scraps to were actually healthier than the other ones. So he started thinking, well, is there something that we're doing with our food that's maybe denaturing it or causing it not to be as nutritious? So he conducted this study that was really mind-opening to me. He divided the cats up into groups, and the cats got 3 meals a day. All of the cats got 1 meal that included raw milk, raw meat, viscera, which is like the organs, and some supplements, some nutritional vitamin supplements. Okay, all of them got that for 1 meal. The other 2 meals, one group continued to get the raw milk and raw meat. Okay, let me back up. One group got raw meat, one group got raw milk, one group got cooked meat, one group got pasteurized milk or cooked milk, and then one group got sweetened condensed milk. So it was cooked milk with sugar added. Okay.
Yummy.
What he found was that the raw milk and raw meat cats pretty much had the same response to their diet. Okay, through all 4 generations that he followed this repeatedly, they were all healthy, had no problems, everything was fine, reproduced generation after generation. The cooked milk and cooked meat cats ended up having health problems, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that. And then the sweetened condensed milk cats, not only did they have some deformities, but they were kind of, if you can imagine, of course, they were jittery, they were aggressive, but the ones that were fed the cooked were kind of lethargic. They ended up having problems with bone formation. They ended up having problems with fertility. They ended up having no interest in sex. Now, if you know nature is concerned with survival of the species, right? So the cats were not interested in having sex to perpetuate the species. There was even cats that were born with like no anus. And each generation of cats was worse than the previous generation. It got to the point where by the third and fourth generation, the third generation had problems with infertility, and if they could reproduce, most of the babies were stillborn. Most of the kittens were. But what he found was that he could go back and he could reverse that by feeding them, in the second and third generation, feeding them the raw food diet. So that doesn't mean that necessarily that we need to eat raw food, but it does mean that we need to look at what we're doing to our food and whether we're able to digest it in order to have not only perpetuation of the species, but to be healthy, to not have weak bones, to not have illness, to not have infertility problems. I mean, how many problems do we hear nowadays with fertility, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about digestion. Not too much about nutrition right now, but we will talk a little bit about that too. So the first handout is that every cell that makes up every tissue, that makes up every organ, depends on the body's digestive system to provide the nutrients it needs to keep on functioning. Okay, so when our body's functioning properly, our body takes the proteins and breaks it down into amino acids, and takes fats, breaks it down into essential fatty acids, takes carbs, breaks it down into glucose, basically, okay? And then those are used to feed every cell of our body. Every single cell uses those nutrients. We've got macronutrients of water, protein, carbs, and fatty acids. We've got micronutrients of vitamins and minerals, right? Okay. So digestion is a north to south process. What that means is that digestion begins in the brain. If you've got a problem in the south, many people are constipated, have problems with constipation or diarrhea, and they want to address that symptom, right? They want to address the constipation or the diarrhea. Well, the problem actually begins further north, and that's what we'll talk about today. So whenever you've got a client that comes to you with a problem down south, always look north for where the problem really begins, okay? So digestion actually begins in the brain. The sight and the smell of food begins the body's process of releasing digestive enzymes. How many of you have smelled your favorite food and you immediately begin salivating, right? Okay, well, not only does the sight and smell of food start the saliva production, but it also starts hydrochloric acid production in the stomach. Okay, the challenge that we have, so that's when it's functioning properly. The dysfunction, though, is that most of us are not in a parasympathetic state, because that's what happens when we're in a parasympathetic state. Now, we know that the parasympathetic state is rest and digestion, right? And the sympathetic state is fight or flight. Well, when we're in a sympathetic state, the body says, what's more important? Do I need to digest this food, or do I need to save my life and run from whatever it is that's chasing me? So most body functions are put on hold. Most endocrine glands they stop producing. So when we're in a chronic state of chronic sympathetic state, it's going to affect our digestion. So what do we need to do? When we eat, we want to stop. We want to sit down. We don't want to stand to eat. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but there are times I stand at the kitchen counter and I'm eating my food. We don't want to do that, because when we stand to eat, it affects our blood pressure. It affects our adrenal glands. So sit down, pause, put your body in a parasympathetic state so that you're prepared to digest your food.
But not in the car.
Not in the car, because are you relaxed in the car when you're driving? Absolutely not. Yeah, you're worried about the people next door to you. What are they going to do? So, and that's another good point, because if we're in the car, typically what we're eating is fast food. Okay, fast food. I mean, how many times do you actually smell the fast food? That's not going to get those digestive enzymes flowing, right? And because they're so greasy and covered with sauce, we don't take time to chew them, which is the next thing that happens, right? We want to chew them, so we chew it maybe 2 or 3 or 4 times, and then we swallow it. So we've got these big chunks of food going into our stomach where there's inadequate hydrochloric acid production, which affects digestion. So stress is one of the main factors of insufficient hydrochloric acid production. So we want to make sure that we're in a parasympathetic state. Maybe say a blessing on your food, sit down with your family, make it a nice, relaxing, so that your body can actually do what it's designed to do. So the next thing that happens is we put it in our mouth, right? So we want to chew. We want to make sure that we're breaking that down. It's easier for the stomach to digest particles that are smaller than big chunks. Okay? So when things are working properly and we're chewing our food, it moistens it as well. Not only does it break it down smaller, but the saliva moistens it. Now the saliva is actually it's salivary amylase, and it starts to break down carbs. Have any of you ever chewed on a piece of bread for a long, long time and noticed that it got sweet? Right? Okay. The saliva starts the process of breaking down carbohydrates into glucose. It also is slightly antibacterial. So if there's any bacteria in our food, it starts the process of breaking those down. Okay? Let's see if there's anything else I want to tell you. Nope. So we've got it in our mouth. We swallow this bolus that's been moisturized, right? It's got the saliva, it's sort of the breakdown process, it's smaller. It goes down the esophagus, it goes into our stomach. Now at the top of the stomach there's a sphincter. It's the bottom of the esophagus. It's called either the lower esophageal sphincter, or it's called the cardiac sphincter, okay? And that opens and goes into the stomach. Now, the sight and the smell, remembered we talked about how the sight and the smell starts the production of hydrochloric acid. Well, when the bolus goes into the stomach, the expansion of the stomach also begins the release of other enzymes. I just make sure I get pepsin. So that starts the release of pepsin. So when pepsin mixes with the hydrochloric acid, it becomes pepsinogen, which is what breaks down proteins. Now that's important because when we have proteins in our stomach that we want to break down, if we don't have sufficient hydrochloric acid, the pepsinogen isn't going to be converted to pepsin in order to begin the process of breaking down. Hydrochloric acid by itself does not break down proteins, but when it mixes with the pepsinogen, it becomes pepsin. Does that make sense? Okay. Yep. And that's what breaks down proteins. That's important because what is our stomach made of? Our stomach is a protein, right? So it's releasing mucus to protect the lining of the stomach, but it's also producing the pepsinogen and the hydrochloric acid, which then combine to break down proteins. Okay, so we've got this bolus in there that's mixing with the hydrochloric acid, it's mixing with the pepsinogen, and we want it to be the proper pH. Now, pH is really important. We hear a lot about people being very acidic. And that's true, but we want our stomach to be acidic. How many people do you know that take either antacids that are prescribed or antacids that are over the counter? A lot of people. So here's what happens in the stomach. So in the stomach, we have this hydrochloric acid that's being released, right, which changes the acidity of the stomach. Now, optimally, in order for digestion to happen, it needs to be between like 1.5 and 3.0, roughly somewhere in there, in order to digest proteins. Okay. When it gets to the right pH, the pyloric sphincter will open to release it into the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine. If the pH does not get to that proper pH, to that proper acidic level, it just sits there and festers. So you've got proteins that are festering and become putrid. You've got carbs that are festering and become fermented. You've got fats that are becoming rancid. And what happens is that sphincter at the top, the cardiac sphincter, begins to relax. Okay? And so the food starts to go back up, which it's not supposed to do. And you end up having acid reflux. And so what do? They take an antacid to lower the pH. Well, the reason it's backing up is because the pH in their stomach isn't acidic enough. Make sense? Okay, so the solution is not to take an antacid, it's to take something to enhance the acidity of the stomach. So let's say that it gets to that point where it's acidic enough in the stomach to release the pyloric sphincter to go into the duodenum. Okay, once it gets into the duodenum, there's sensors in the duodenum. There's receptor sites in the duodenum that signal the release of bicarbonate from the pancreas, but only if it's acidic enough. So if it's acidic enough to open it, but not acidic enough to release the bicarbonate, then you've got heartburn, because you've got this chyme now that has gone into the duodenum, and it's too acidic to release the bicarbonate, and it starts to burn. And so what do people do? They take antacids, right? Which is, again, the wrong thing to do. So whether it's heartburn or indigestion or acid reflux, yeah, either way, it's caused because the stomach isn't acidic enough. So you want to make sure that you've got sufficient hydrochloric acid production, which is a huge problem for most people, especially if you're doing a fast food, refined food diet. And whether it's top or bottom, it's caused because you don't have enough hydrochloric acid. Now, there's a test that you can do that's very simple. I want you to first find your anatomical inch. To find your anatomical inch, you'll take a look at your thumb, and from the tip of your thumb to that first knuckle, that's your anatomical inch. Okay? Everyone have their anatomical inch? Okay. Now I want you to find the base of your sternum, and right below your sternum is the xiphoid process, right? Okay, so from the xiphoid process, I want you to go over to your left against the rib cage, come down 1 anatomical inch, and push laterally, from medial to lateral. Is it tender? Anyone has tender? Okay, that's a hydrochloric acid point. That's an acute point. Okay, that means that you've got some problems going on right now with hydrochloric acid production. Now, I want you to go back to the base of the sternum. Okay, come over to that rib that's right there, and then roll up into that 6th intercostal space, about mid-mammillary line, and I want you to push A to P.
What's A to P?
Anatomy, or anterior to posterior.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay. Any tenderness with anybody on that point? Okay, so your sixth intercostal space, mid-mammillary, right? That's usually right underneath the bra line for most women. Push A to P. If there's some tenderness there, that's a chronic hydrochloric acid problem.
Are you on top of the rib cage or under?
You're in that intercostal space. So you're the sixth intercostal space. So you're not on the rib, you're between the two ribs. Okay? That's a chronic point, that's a chronic point. That means you've had some problems with hydrochloric acid production going on for a while. Okay, so whether it's acute or whether it's chronic, that's something that you'll need to look at. And we've got some suggestions coming up here in a little while. Yeah. Right here? Yeah, that's something else. That's not a reflex point, yeah. I mean, it may be, but not one that I'm aware of. Okay. So, it goes into the duodenum, right? And from there it goes into your, further down into the small intestine. And you've got microvilli and villi that then, if they're working oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. I made 50, so I'm guessing that there are no more right now. But if you email me, I can email you the... Okay. So it goes into the duodenum. From the duodenum, it goes further into the small intestine, where villi and microvilli make more surface area, because that's where the nutrient absorption happens, if the food has been properly broken down and digested. Now, if it hasn't been broken down, you've got big chunks of food, and what that does is compress the microvilli and the villi. So you've got these microvilli coming up like this, and villi. Well, if these are the villi, the microvilli are all around it, okay? And when you've got big chunks of food, it kind of compresses those, and it creates gaps. And those gaps allow undigested food or maldigested food to go into the body. Now, if it's a protein, your body's immune system recognizes it as foreign, and that's where we get allergies. Now, to be a true allergy, it has to be a protein, because there's an IEG chemical that's released. But you can still develop sensitivities even if it's not a protein because of the escaping it from the digestive system into the body. Okay, so we want to make sure that our food is broken down, proper hydrochloric acid, proper mastication is the only word I can think of, so that when it gets to the small intestine, then the nutrients can be absorbed. Okay. Once it goes through the small intestine, it gets to the large intestine. We've got friendly bacteria that are in there. They're taking some of the product or the food that's left over, and from there it's actually creating more vitamins. So the gut flora produces vitamin K, produces some B vitamins, but it also produces butyric acid. And it does that through the fatty acids that we consume, or through the fats that we consume. And butyric acid is what feeds our colon. Now, most of our organs get their nutrients from the blood, right? From blood circulation. But the colon isn't very well vasculated. And so it gets most of its nutrients and most from butyric acid, which it can only get if we're eating proper fats. Now, one step, we're going to step back just a minute since we're talking about fats. When it comes out of the stomach, when the bolus comes out of the stomach and it's chyme and it goes into the duodenum, we know that if it's the right pH, it'll signal the pancreas to release bicarbonate, right? Well, if there's fat, then it releases, there's a sensor there for CCK, cholecystokinin, and that tells the gallbladder to release bile. Now, bile is basically comes from the liver, and as the liver detoxifies, it pulls those toxins from our blood and it puts it into the bile. Okay, and the bile breaks down fats. But the problem that we have when it's not functioning properly is if we're eating poor fats, if we're eating the wrong kinds of fats, then the bile's really not sure what to do with it. The body's really not sure because it's not really stimulating that cholecystokinin, right, the CCK. And so we end up having bile that's viscous, which means it's sluggish, it's hard to get through. We end up having gallstones, okay? If we don't get enough hydration, that causes the same problem, because most of the digestive system process is actually a process of hydrolysis. So we need water to keep everything flowing. The CCK, there's a receptor in the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine, and if there's fats if there's fats in the chyme, then that triggers the release of CCK, which then triggers the gallbladder to start milking out the bile. Okay, so now when we get into the colon, oh sorry, go ahead. If you don't have a gallbladder, your liver is still producing the bile. The gallbladder is just a storage place for it, so that to help with digestion. So fats really become a problem. You want to make sure that it's really important then for you to be eating the right kinds of fats. So first of all, anything that's hydrogenated, no. Hydrogenated oils are really bad. Anything that's, a good rule of thumb is if it's natural, go for it. So the easiest ones are butter, right? Butter's really easy to find. It's a natural oil or a fat. Coconut oil is an easy one that's natural. Olive oil, of course. Lard, tallow, if you have access to that, from pasture-raised animals. Those are actually very good and are very high in B vitamins. And pasture-raised is important because many of the vitamins that the cows get will be from the grass. Cows are designed to eat grass. They're not designed to eat grain. And when you have cows that eat grain, usually what they'll do is the first 6 months of their life, they'll be allowed to eat grass and nurse with their mom. After that, they're put on grain, and that period of time, a lot of the animals will die, so they're stuffed with a lot of antibiotics to prevent them from dying, because the grain, the liver is not designed for that. The body, they don't really have stomachs. They have, galen, what are they called? Not lumens, but thank you. But they're not designed to eat grain. That's why they have to feed them with so many antibiotics. But the reason they do it is because it helps them gain weight faster, and it causes more marbling of their meat. So when they're out in the grass, they get the vitamins from the grass, which they get from the sun, and they also get vitamins from the sun by being out in the sun. Okay, so those types of fats are actually very good for you. But if you're eating the fats that are like Crisco or what are some of the other corn oils?
Canola, corn oil, vegetable oils. Any
vegetable oils really aren't cold. I mean, if it's cold processed and it's from a nut or a seed, that's one thing. If it's cold processed or cold pressed, but if it's been extracted, not good. It actually causes, like I said, it'll contribute to gallstones. It'll contribute to viscosity in the bile, which makes it difficult for your body to digest fats. Okay, so now we've gone through the small intestine. We're in the colon. What the colon does, not only does it extract water, right, so the body can use it again, but it also extracts the bile, so the bile can be reused. But it only extracts the bile if you've got fiber, because the bile will bind to the fiber. Otherwise, if the bile binds to the fiber, then you get the peristalsis that helps you go to the bathroom. If you don't have the fiber, then the bile is just reabsorbed, and you end up with constipation. Is all of this making sense? Do you see how it's all tying together from top to bottom?
North to south.
From north to south, that's right. Okay, do you have any questions so far? Okay. So when you've got proper bile production, right? It goes through the body and it's breaking down fats, goes through the system, breaking down fats. If you've got sufficient fiber in your colon, then the bile will combine with the fiber and it'll create peristalsis, which is the action that causes you to go to the bathroom. If you don't have sufficient fiber, then the bile is just reuptaked into the body, okay, and you end up with constipation. Now the bile will still be reuptaked, but not as fast when you've got fiber. Okay, makes sense? Okay. So what slide are we on now? I don't have slides. So let's talk a little bit about, so we've talked about the ileocecal, we talked about the ileocecal valve a little bit. So let's talk about what you do if you've got a client who comes to you with digestive issues, right? What are some digestive issues that you have clients that come to you with? What are they complaining about? IBS. Okay, what else? Constipation. Okay, what else? Diarrhea.
Bloating.
Okay. Bloating, gas bloating, right. What was candida? Yes. All of these are signs of improper digestion. So one of the things I've done, and probably the most important thing, if you take anything from this discussion, the most important thing is going to be sufficient hydrochloric acid production, because without that, there's a bug. Without sufficient hydrochloric acid production, then nothing's going to get digested, right? And you're going to end up having constipation and having leaky gut. So what I've done, I've included in your handout some foods that support hydrochloric acid production, but also support good digestion in general. I've also given you a handout on what you can give to your clients if you've got a client that comes to you and they're on some kind of antacid. Now, antacids are not something that you need to be concerned about stopping cold turkey, except that it could cause some discomfort. If they're willing to go through the discomfort, then they can stop it cold turkey. If they're not, then here's some steps that you might give to them. And of course, if they've got a prescription one, then you want to make sure that their doctor is on board with it and everything else. Now I've got a few more minutes that Brad said for questions. So I want to know if you've got any questions on what we've talked about so far.
So I'm going to ask. Go ahead. Who's asking?
Me.
Go.
So I'm confused about the whole pasteurization. Why you want pasteurization? Is it supposed to kill the antibiotics?
Okay, so no, pasteurization actually kills a lot of the enzymes and so in milk, most people are allergic to lactose in milk, right? Well, raw milk has a natural enzyme called lactase, which helps with the digestion of milk. When you've pasteurized it, then it kills that, and your body's not really sure what to do with it. Okay? Now, one of the other things that I wanted to talk about, too, I wanted to just mention is in the stomach, when you've got proper hydrochloric acid, if there's any bacteria are proteins. So if you don't have proper hydrochloric acid production, then you're not breaking down the proteins, not only of your food, but of any bacteria, which can cause problems further on. You can, illness basically, or candida, right?
So Jasmine, I think you're confusing pasteurized with pastured. So your fats that you want your meats to be pastured, not pasteurized. Okay?
Thank you. Okay.
I have two questions, but go. Two, production of HCl, you got foods to talk about that. Do you recommend any type of natural supplementation for HCl?
So there are some supplements that you can do to help support hydrochloric acid until you get your body to a place where it's producing sufficient on its own. There's one that's called HCl plus. It's HCl with some glandulars. There's another one that's called Hydrozyme. These are both Biotics products that are very, very good. Biotics is a pharmaceutical grade that you can order from one of their reps, I guess, from a doctor. A lot of times chiropractors will sell them. After taking this class now, I can sell them too. But you can get HCl plus or Hydrozyme will help with that. Probably one of them, that parasympathetic state, I can't state enough how important that is, and sufficient hydration. Hydration actually is what starts the peristalsis in the upper part of the digestive system. So if you're not hydrated, you're not going to get you know what peristalsis is, right? You know, it's that movement through the whole tube that keeps things pushing down. Okay, hydration is what starts that. And then it continues with the just the pressure and the expansion of the stomach.
What happens when you drink too much water?
Tell me what you mean by too much water.
Well, I learned that you can't drink too much water.
I guess it's possible, but it's really not a problem that's prevalent in our society. A good a good guideline is half your weight in ounces of water a day, generally not more than 100 ounces. And then you want to increase when it's hot and sweaty like this, or when you're exercising. Most people are not getting sufficient water.
I think what it does is it imbalances the sodium and the potassium in the blood.
It's if you
Yeah.
drink it all at once too much.
So here's the other thing, right? So your body is really good at regulating how much water is in the bloodstream, okay? So if you go and you chug like a whole pint of water or a gallon of water or a quart of water, a whole bottle of water at one time, the body's going to say, oh, there's too much water in the blood. We need to release it. And so it has the kidneys release through urine, along with some other minerals and enzymes, electrolytes, okay? If you sip it throughout the day, then it can use that water, and it can use it for all the body processes. But when you chug it, then the body needs to release it. And when you release the enzymes, the electrolytes are what holds the water into the cell. And so when you're chugging it and you're releasing water, you can actually create more problems because you're releasing the electrolytes, which is what keeps the water in the cell and keeps them hydrated. So when you're sipping throughout the day rather than chugging throughout the day, then your body can utilize the water that you're giving it. Make sense?
Did you have a question? Go. Oh, sorry.
Another point that I've learned in a class that I'm taking is that movement and deep breathing, a lot of times people have problems with constipation because they don't take the time to actually do a proper belly breath. So movement and deep breathing can actually help
Push things.
Help
What she
your
said
body
was
function.
movement and deep breathing, and she's right. We have a very sedentary lifestyle, and so movement does help with that. Absolutely. Thank you.
Oh, well, she mentioned not having a gallbladder, and so I'm assuming that even though the bile is still being produced, it would need, most people need some supplements
Yeah.
to increase the digestion of fat.
Yeah, there is a supplement that helps with digestion of fats, and I can't think, but my husband takes it. I think it's betaine. Betaine is the one. There are some foods too. Beets are really good for that. But there is actually, if you've got your gallbladder removed, you probably should be taking the betaine supplement or something similar to that for the rest of your life, because it is going to create a problem. Even though the liver is still releasing the bile, it's not going to be concentrated at that point of the CCK being released.
You can take an ox bile supplement as well for horse bile.
Yeah, a lot of the gallbladder supplements, a lot of the digestive supplements that deal with gallbladder are from other animals. Yeah, either ox or even pig.
Cat. Cat?
I've not heard about not
No,
yet.
that would be Dr. Weston Price's cat.
Pottinger, yeah.
Yeah, Pottinger. It was Pottinger that did that, not Weston Price?
No, Price was the one who went around the country looking at
okay.
different people and finding out what
I'll
made them
change
healthy.
that. It was Pottinger, not Price. I put it on your thing, so.
Yeah, Dr. Pottinger and
Pottinger.
cats. Yes.
Pottinger's cats. Okay.
Just a little bit out there, but one thing we did to increase hydrochloric acid was starting your day on an empty stomach with celery juice.
Yes.
We were
Celery
serving
juice
out
does,
two-
yeah.
2 cups. It made a huge difference. My husband stopped having acid reflux for a couple months while he was on it.
Yep.
Celery
Yeah,
juice.
celery juice is a really good.
It's the unspoken healthy nutritional
Yeah,
drink.
right,
People would drink it
I
more.
don't know if there's any scientific proof behind it, but it worked for
Oh
us.
yeah,
Does it
no,
take a
there.
lot of celery
Yeah,
to produce all of that? Yeah, I thought like it was on sale, so I bought it.
Stefania.
Well, and the thing that you have not mentioned, but or maybe you have, but it's always obviously the underline is that, okay, what are we eating that is not a human part of the human diet?
Right.
Just like the cats were fed a non-feline diet that messed them up. There is a human diet,
Right.
and what are
Absolutely.
we eating that is causing all this?
So a lot of the foods that we eat, if it's processed, the body doesn't even recognize it as food. Yeah. So if it's in a box, probably not real food. And that's when there's been lots of things that have led to where we are now with our diet. So if you think about how many generations, a lot of the problems with our diet began before World War II, but especially after World War II, when we wanted to make things more convenient. where we wanted to make sure they had a longer shelf life. We wanted, because we were shipping things over to our allies, so we wanted them to have a longer shelf life, and so things became hydrogenized, which is basically taking a bad fat and pushing hydrogen through it to make it so it's kind of semi-solid. Body has no idea what to do with that. We began canning things, as far as like not canning things ourselves, but we began buying things in the grocery store that were pre-canned with lots of chemicals. So if the body doesn't recognize it as food, it's not really sure what to do with it, and you're not going to get the nutrients from it. So it finds what it can, but a lot of times those anti-nutrients will actually block the receptor sites on the cells to prevent the real nutrient from getting through. So the best thing is to eat real food, fruits and vegetables, of course, real meat, real milk, and avoid anything that's in a box.